for the exercises during this workshop. So please make sure that you find your way there and start downloading stuff. So let's get started. So first off, hi, I'm Marcus. I work as a developer advocate at Grafana Labs. Grafana Labs is the company behind, it's a company that employs most of the maintainers of the Grafana project. But Grafana itself is an open source project. You can download it, you can go to GitHub, you can install it without having to contact us at all. So my job is on a daily basis to work with the community, to do trainings like this, to do talks, but also I work a lot with the plugin community. As you will see, Grafana has support for plugins, and you can extend Grafana by building these plugins yourself. And if that sounds interesting to you, feel free to reach out to me and I'll help you get started. So Grafana is an open source tool for monitoring services. It could be, web services, it could be microservices, but it can also be used to monitor things like energy usage in your apartment, or temperature or humidity in your house. What you monitor with Grafana is endless, as long as you have a running system that you can extract data from. That is the only thing you really need. Grafana itself is just a visualization layer on top of your actual data. So what's important is that Grafana doesn't actually store any of your data. It merely connects to your databases, as we will see in a bit. But what you can do in Grafana is that you can take that data that you have and you can start figuring out what the state of your system is. You can start discovering data. You can start exploring to find out what's wrong. Are there errors in your system? Is the service down? What's the experience for the end users? Things like that. So we'll see how to get started today and how to set up some dashboards and how to start exploring and monitoring a demo application. So Grafana is, like I said, an open source project that was started in 2014. And today it's installed on more than 700,000 machines, and with more than 1 million active users using all of them. So it's definitely a project that has been building up over these years. And in the beginning, it actually started off as a fork of another open source project called Kibana, and where the founder, Torkel, he wanted to add support for graphite to be able to visualize time series from a database, or a time series database called metrics database called Graphite. And so he started building it, and eventually, it was starting to be picked up by more and more people, and it started receiving support for more than just Graphite, notably Prometheus and many more today. So if you don't want to install anything, you can go and check out how Grafana looks like and what it feels to be working with Grafana just by going to play.grafana.org, where we have a public installation of Grafana with dashboards to demonstrate things like graphs and other visualizations that you would typically use when you set up your installation. So go ahead and visit that and click around a little bit. You will set up your own system in a little bit, but for now you can sort of go there to get a feeling for what it looks like and what you can do with it. So to understand why Grafana is so powerful, you need to figure out how does your system, how does your organization handle data? And typically, we're seeing organizations today, they have multiple systems, right? It's not just one database. They have data in multiple places. So you might get an alert in Slack, and you might want to visualize that in your dashboards. But then you would have to go to your metrics database to look at the actual metrics, which could be Prometheus, or you could go to Elasticsearch to look at the logs or the metrics over there. And when you want to drill down even further, you might go to something like Jaeger, a open source project for distributing traces. And that's when you finally discover the problem, right? And so you're touching on all of these projects, and while you're kind of figuring out what's the problem. And this is a lot of overhead, and Grafana hopes to be that tool that combines all of these and that consolidates this experience. And so what could look like is, where you have a environment or a landscape where you're using all of these services like the ones you see on this slide, and you want to connect all of them. And with Grafana, you can do that. No matter where the data lives, you can connect that and visualize it along with data from any other place. So where the data lives is not important. You can connect it and you can visualize it all in one spot. So what you could do then is that you can take this process and you can have it all in Grafana. So no matter what data source you're using for Prometheus, no matter where you store your logs, no matter where you store your traces, you can bring it all into Grafana and provide a consistent experience no matter where the data lives. So before I start talking further, let's get you set up. So I want you to be able to explore a little bit about for yourself. And so I thought that we could get your environment up and running. And so if you haven't installed Docker yet, I'm going to continue doing the exercises with you, but feel free to catch up as you get it installed. So please go ahead and do a git clone of the tutorial environment and go to that directory and run Docker Compose up. And what that will do is that will launch a Grafana. It will launch a Loki instance as well as a Prometheus instance. And those will collect your metrics and your logs. It will also fire up a demo application that we will be using for this demo. And I'll show you, I'll do a demo of that application in a little bit. But we're going to look at and see how we can start monitoring that demo application. So I'm going to give you a little bit to get this set up, but feel free to let me know in the chat once you are ready to continue. So when you run this Docker Compose command, please browse to localhost:3000, and you should be seeing a Grafana login. So once you've done that, let me know in the chat and we'll continue. So I think that we can start going on to the next slide. If you're not finished yet, go ahead and get that set up, and try to follow along as you're downloading the images and dependencies. So as I mentioned, we'll be using a demo application for today, and we'll be monitoring this application so we can understand a little bit more about what's the state of it. Are there any errors? How does it work? How much traffic does it have? Things like that. So you can access the demo application in the same environment that you've already set up by going to localhost 8081. And what you see here is a very simple interface. And what you can do is that you can add things like, you can create links. So for example, I'm gonna create a link to, Grafana Labs. And then I can hit submit. And oops, as you see now, something went wrong. So I see a blank page. I'm gonna see if I can hit refresh. So if this happens to you, that's awesome, because then you have more to explore and in a little bit, because this application actually fails every now and then. And let's see if we can get it back up. Usually it fails a little after I've actually demoed the first example. So let's see if we can get it back here. There we go. So we see now that we actually created that link. And so if I click it, I will be taken to that website. But actually, if I hit refresh again, there should be a little arrow here to the side. Oh, it's not. It doesn't want to play at all today. There we go. So it doesn't seem like it's loading it for me, but there should be a little arrow next to the link that lets you vote for this link. So if you click that, then you should be adding a point. So today, the demo application is just failing constantly, which is great because we have tons of things to measure here. So what I can do is I can also look at this /metrics endpoint, and that will actually expose all the Prometheus metrics for this service. So what's interesting here, if you're not familiar with Prometheus, this endpoint lets Prometheus come in and scrape and sample the metrics exposed by your demo application. So looking here, let me see if I can make that a little bigger. Every row here is a time series and a value. So the name of a time series and a value. And every time that Prometheus scrapes or samples this endpoint, that's going to be stored inside Prometheus along with the timestamp of when it made that request. So for example, if I start refreshing this page, you'll see that some of the numbers actually change. So every time I refresh, that's a new sample of my application. And so over time, and depending on how often you scrape your endpoint, that will all end up in Prometheus, and we'll be able to visualize that in a little bit. So this service is using Prometheus, as I said, but it is also using a logging tool called Loki, and a open source project for logs. So in addition to the Prometheus metrics that you're seeing here, we will be adding some logs to our setup as well. So enough about that. Let's go back to Grafana and see if I had some slides for you, actually. So yeah, by now you probably have already tried out the demo application. You submitted a link, and you checked out the metrics endpoint to see what kind of metrics we're talking about. So the next step is to actually connect that data to Grafana. And to do that, we're using something called a data source. And data sources in Grafana is one of the main concepts. And so what I mentioned earlier is that Grafana doesn't actually host any of the data itself. It connects to your database and retrieves the data from there. So a data source in Grafana is essentially the information about how to connect to your data. So that includes things like the URL or the credentials and other connection-related parameters. So right now we're going to set up a data source in Grafana. So there are a number of data sources available in Grafana when you install it. And that's not just all of it. So there are plenty more data sources available from the community. So Grafana supports plugins, and which lets you build integrations with other tools. It could be in-house data sources or things like it. So you can go to our website and check out the plugin marketplace if your data source is not supported out of the box. So let's do a demo to see if we can connect to the Prometheus instance that we've set up. So I'll go back to Grafana here. And what you see now is the login screen of Grafana itself. So by default, a admin user has been created for you with the username admin and password admin. So if you hit login, you can set a new password. Let's set something really secure. There you go. And now we're logged in. So this is the first thing you'll see when you log into Grafana. This is what we call the home dashboard. And you can, for now, it contains some resources for how to get started with Grafana, but you can also set it to something that makes more sense for you. It could be your primary service. It could be high-level metrics that let you drill down into other systems. And what's more interesting is what you can see to the left here. So this is the side menu. This is where you'll access most of Grafana from. So the first thing we'll do is that we'll look at this cog icon. If you hover over it, you'll see a section called configuration. And if you click data sources here, let's actually make it a little bigger so you all can see. So if we hit add data sources, you'll come to this view here. And right now we haven't added anything, so you'll just see this big button that says add data source. But after we've done that, there will be a list here of all the data sources that you've set up. So we'll add a data source. And now you get the option of selecting a data source. And as you can see, there's plenty of built-in data sources in here. And these are our popular projects, but like I mentioned earlier, there are many more that are supported through third-party plugins. Luckily, the time series database that we're using for this application has already been implemented in the core Grafana. So we'll select Prometheus from the list here. And this is the configuration view for that data source. And as you can see, there's plenty of things that we can configure here, how often we want to sample our endpoints, some credentials, and other things. For now, we only need to set up the URL. So where does the Prometheus endpoint live? And in our case, it's exposed under Prometheus 1990, port 1990. So if we add that and then we scroll down, we see this button here that says Save and Test. And when I click that, Grafana is going to make a single request to try and see if the connection works. So it could be that it tries to query some data from that data source, or it could just be a ping to make sure that everything seems to be working. So if you see a red message here, that means that Grafana had trouble accessing that data, and you might want to troubleshoot a little bit closer. So, but that means that we now have a data source set up. And I would love for you to try it out yourself. So go ahead and add a Prometheus data source in your instance of Grafana, and make sure that you get a green message once you've configured that data source. So I'm going to allow you a few minutes to do that, and I'll get back to you in a bit. So I think you should be able to access your Prometheus instance by now. You should have added a data source to Grafana. And so now we can start looking at the actual data. So let's see if we can move to the next slide. So right now, we don't actually know what kind of metrics our data source contains. We don't know exactly what metrics our demo application exposes. And if you have hundreds or even thousands of microservices, it can be really tricky to get a feeling for what's there and what you should be looking for. So the first step right now is to just get a feeling for what kind of data we have to work with. And by doing that, or to do that, we are going to use a feature called Explore. So Explore is a view or a section in Grafana that lets you do so-called ad hoc queries. And ad hoc queries, what I mean by that is a query that is typically followed by a second query, or even third and fourth. So it's typically something where you make a very broad query to begin with, just to get a feeling for what you have. But then you realize that it's not quite what I want. So let's drill down a little bit. Let's make it more specific until I find something I'm interested in. So let's see how to do that. Let's go back to Grafana. And to go to Explore, move your cursor to the side menu and click this compass here in the side menu. So if you go here, you'll see a blank view right now, but you can click this drop down here and select the Prometheus data source that we added just now. So what you see right now is a query editor and a little cheat sheet with things that, things that could get you started, essentially. So right now, I don't really know what kind of metrics I'm looking for. So I can actually explore it by clicking this drop down here to the left, so called metrics. So these are some of the namespaces that Prometheus exposes. And in our case, I'm interested in this TNS. This is actually the name of our service. So if I click that, I see a bunch of metrics that Prometheus has collected for our service, the demo application that you saw earlier. So I'm actually interested in the number of requests that has been made so far. So I'm going to hit this client request duration seconds count. So if I do that, I will see a graph here followed by the actual data under here. So I can see here that right now there have been 9 requests to the Prometheus instance. And we have done some posts, and I believe you got some 500s as well. But this is what's more interesting is the rate of these requests. This is the total request that has come in so far. So instead, I want to actually look at the rate of which they come in. So I'm gonna instead be hitting a query that takes the rate per second over the last 1 minute. And I can go up here and I can click Run Query, and then that gives me this this graph here that tells me, we saw some activity around this this time right here. So we have a question whether we can access the slides after the session. Absolutely. I will make sure that we post that somewhere that you can access it from. I will talk to the organizers on where the best way to host that is. Yeah, I'll let you know. So the next step here is that I can see that our current query returns 3 time series here. So we see one here with get and 200s, 500s, and 204. So what I want to do is that I kind of want to group this based on status code. So I can do another query here that adds another function here to my query called sum. So I can sum by, let's say, status code. So if I do that, Prometheus will actually group the time series into the bucket. Time series for each status code. So now, no matter which endpoint I hit, it's going to be grouped under that status code. So that's kind of what I want right now. Let's say that I wanna see what status codes are available or exposed by experienced by our users. So I'm gonna actually copy this for a little bit, and let's leave it there. Actually, let's see if we can. You can try this out yourself. So I want you to start exploring some of these queries that are available. So try to follow roughly the same steps that I just showed you. Try to see if you can find some other metrics, not just the one that I went with. So I'm gonna allow you a few minutes to try that out, and I'll get back to you in a little bit. So hopefully you've had a chance to explore some of the metrics that you have available to you. And so you have a little idea of what you can do and what we can start visualizing. So which is the next step that we're gonna take a look at. So now that we know roughly what kind of queries that we're looking for, what kind of data we want to visualize, we want to see, for example, the traffic, and we want to group it by a status code, for example. So the way to do that is to create a dashboard. And in Grafana, a dashboard is a collection of these panels, as we call them, that contains a visualization along with some data that is used to create that visualization. So each of these panels, data can come from any data source. So it doesn't matter where the data is located. You can bring everything in. You can do Prometheus data along with data from MySQL, with logs from Loki, and you bring it all into one dashboard. And so this is typically something that a lot of teams have on their walls. So they walk by it every day and see what is the state of the system right now, and is there any issues that we should be aware of. So like I mentioned, there are several panels in a dashboard, and each one of them consists of a query and a visualization. So let's see if we can create a dashboard with a panel. So to do that, I go back to Grafana, and in the side menu here, there is a big plus here to the side. If I hover that and click dashboard in the menu that comes up, I get this view. And right now it's pretty much empty, but it does have a helper here to allow me to quickly add a new panel to my dashboard. So if I click that button, I get thrown into this edit mode. So this, what you see right now, is the panel edit mode. And there are three main sections to this panel edit mode. The first one that you see right here, this is your preview, basically. This is the actual panel that you're creating. So this is how it will look like when you add it to your dashboard. So if you want to see more of that, you can adjust these sections here. And to the bottom here, you see the query editor. And it looks very similar to the one you saw in the Explore mode. In fact, it's usually very identical. And you can select the data source that you want to query. In this case, we only have one, apart from some built-in ones that is already there. So this is where you define the data that you want to look at. And to the right here, you see the panel edit, or the panel editor, which controls how you visualize that data. So in this case, we've already selected the graph visualization per default, but there are several other ones that you can choose from as well. And just like I mentioned in the beginning, if you want another visualization that is not supported by Grafana, so as you can see, these are the only ones that are available from out of the box, you can install many more panels through the plugin marketplace. So if I scroll down, I also get some settings that are specific to this visualization. So do I want to display them as the metrics as bars, lines, or points even? But let's see if we can add that query that we created before. So I'm just going to paste the query that we created. And if I click outside that box, we can now see the same thing that we did before. So right now, this is very thin right now. I kind of want to look closer at this data. So either I can select the time interval that I want to look at from this drop down here. So let's say that I want to look at the last hour, and that changes the time interval to look closer at that. But I can also click and drag over the area that I want to look at. And now I'm up close. If I want to go out, I can click this zoom out button. Or I can select another time interval again. If I want to update this data, I can click this button here that says refresh dashboard. And when I do that, the panel is going to refresh, and you're going to see more data coming in. You can also set it to auto refresh, so you don't have to do that. So great. Let's see if we can change the visualization a little bit. Let's say that I want to, let's zoom in a little bit so we can see more. So I actually want to use a little more opaque color in my area fill here. I want to make the lines a little thicker. So I changed that as well. And feel free to experiment with these. You can do a staircase instead. So instead of interpolating between, you can get a nice staircase graph. I can add some points as well. I can disable the lines, and I get something like this instead. And if I hover over them, I get the actual value. So I can, for the sake of it, I can see if we can switch to another visualization. So if I do that, I immediately get the data. So I didn't have to actually change the query. So it's using the same data as we saw in the graph. It's just visualizing it in a different way. And once we're done, we can hit apply up to the top right corner. And there we have it. So a panel here, we can also click the heading here and we can move it around. We can also resize it by grabbing the edge here, and we can make it bigger or smaller. And some of the panels actually readjust to a different layout. And once we're happy with it so far, then we can hit this button up in the top here that says Save Dashboard. And let's call it Service for now. And then I hit Save. So that's the first dashboard that we created together. I figured that you want to try and see if you can do this yourself. So go ahead and add a new dashboard and try to add a panel to it. So again, you don't have to use the same query that I did. So go ahead and try different queries, changing some display settings, and try different visualizations. See what the difference is and what you can use to display. So again, I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that. I'll be back in a sec. So hopefully now you should have your own dashboard that you can see and experiment with. So the next thing is I actually want to give you a chance to add more data to your dashboard. So specifically, I want you to add logs to your dashboard. And I'm actually going to do this once, and then I'm going to let you do everything that we have done so far. But I'm going to let you do it for a new data source. So add the data source, create a new panel, select a visualization, and add a query to that dashboard. So all of the steps, but for a new data source. I think you can do it. I'll show you first myself. So if we go back to Grafana here, like we did first, we went to configuration, data sources. You can now see that we already have a Prometheus setup. So I'm going to click add data source here to add another one. So in this case, I want to add logs. So I go down here to logging and document databases. If I click load key here, I'll see something similar. It does have some other configuration here, but for now, we're only interested in the URL. And in this case, Loki is exposed on Loki 3100, so 3100. So I scroll down, I hit 7 test, and we have a data source added to Grafana. So now we can actually go back to our dashboard. And to do that, I can hover over these squares here in the side menu, and I can go to Manage. If I do that, I get a list of all the dashboards I've created so far. If I click the service one that we just created, I get back here. And now we don't see that Add New Panel button here, but we can add it back by clicking this Add Panel button in the navigation up here. So if I click that, I come back here. And since we want to use a different data source this time around, we click the dropdown and we select it from the list here. So as you can see, the query editor changed a little bit because it's a different data source. You might query it in a different way. So the query editor for each data source might be very different. So in this case, though, I'm going to click the dropdown here, and I'm going to select file name, because all the logs are outputted to this file right here. So if I click that, I see now that I can't really graph this. So it suggests that I switch to a table view. And here I can see those logs. I can see that data coming from the logs database. But in this case, I actually want to use the logs visualization. So if I click that, I see something more like I want. So that's wonderful. And now I can apply that, and I have added it to my dashboard. So what I can do now is that I can adjust it a little bit so I can have something that I like. So something like that, maybe. I'm actually gonna go ahead and so what I did right there is that I clicked in the little dropdown here. I can click the heading as well, and I selected edit to go back into edit mode for an existing panel. And I'm gonna change it back to the graph. If I hit apply, then I'm back here. Let's make that a little bigger. And now I can save my dashboard. So now I have metrics on the left side, and I have the logs for the same time interval as those metrics. So that's one other aspect of a dashboard, that all the panels in your dashboard, they share the same time interval. So that means that if I change the interval here, then I'm going to get more logs and more metrics. And so if I saw that I had an error here, then I can zoom in and I can get the logs for that time. So I would love for you to try adding this as well. So do all the steps that I just showed you. And to help you out, I have some of the steps right here. Yeah, I think you can do it. Otherwise, let me know in the chat if you're having any problems. Awesome. So hopefully you have a dashboard right now that displays metrics and logs together for a shared time interval. And you can definitely see how useful this would be if you could see in your graphs where an error occurred. You can zoom in on that interval, and you can immediately get the logs and find out what went wrong. So one last feature that I wanted to show you is called Annotations. And I think that it will really demonstrate the power of Grafana and using multiple data sources in a single visualization to get that single view, no matter where your data lives. So Annotations is a way to add overlay or add additional information to your graphs. So I'm not sure if you can see that in the screenshot here. But in this dashboard, in the example here, you can see these vertical lines in the graphs with regular intervals. So these are annotations. And you can add them manually, but you can also add them using a query. So it goes to a data source and fetches those queries as well. And you can use this, for example, if you want to let your colleagues know that you went in and did something on the server, or you migrated the database or something like that, that you think might have an impact on the production system, for example. And so if you're starting to see errors suddenly, your teammates can go into your dashboard and they can see that, okay, so this person did a change that probably had an effect on our production application. So instead of continue talking, I wanted to show you exactly what I mean. So in this case, I want to annotate this graph, and I want to let my teammates know that I started doing some testing here. So what I can do is that I can simply click in the graph, and this little tooltip comes up with an option to add an annotation. So if I do that, it pops up as a vertical bar here. And I can add something like, I did some testing. And if I hit save, it stays there. And if I hover over this little triangle down here, I can see that description right there. So I get a quick visual indication that something happened, something of importance happened right here. And then I can hover over the triangle to see what actually happened, what that person did. So that's great and all, but I think we can do even more. So what I mentioned before is that we can bring in these annotations from an external data source. So I want to see if I can use the logs from Loki to annotate my data. So what I'm going to do is that to add an annotation query, as opposed to what I did right here, is that I go to this cog icon up here, and I click Dashboard Settings. So here I have a ton of settings that I can change for the entire dashboard. In this case, I'm interested in the tab right here called Annotations. And what I can do here is I can add a new annotation query. So I hit that button. And let's see if I can call this errors. And I select what data source I want to get those annotations from. And just like I did before, I can select the logs from our sample application. And if I can, this is another thing you can do with Loki. So not just, I don't just want to fetch all the logs, but I also want to grep, or I want to filter logs that have the word error in them. So I can do this. And if I do that and then click Add, I see that I've added an annotation query, and I can go back here. And now you see that another bar here shows up, and that is red. And if I hover over the triangle here, I can see that there is a 500 error here, right before we saw all these requests coming in here. So you can see how powerful this can be when you're combining these data sources to give you some indication of what went wrong. So, here we have the metrics, but we're superimposing, or we're adding information from a different data source like Loki. So what we've done so far is that we created a dashboard with data from two different open source projects, Prometheus and Loki. We have them side by side, but not only that, we overlay the Loki logs inside the graph panel on top of Prometheus metrics. So you can imagine if you're a big organization with data in a bunch of different places, you can bring all those in as data sources, and you can add them as panels or as annotations to your existing dashboards. So it doesn't really matter where the data comes from. So let's go back to the graph here. So as a final exercise, I would like you to try this out yourself. Go ahead and add a few annotations manually by clicking in the graph and typing them manually. And try creating an annotation query from to pull in the annotations from Loki. And you don't have to, for example, if you didn't experience any errors in the demo application, you can just leave out the last part about the error, and you can just create an annotation for every log line. So go ahead and do that, and I'll join you in a little bit. So while you're adding your annotations, I thought I would answer a few questions here. So there is a question, or rather an ask to explain the difference between Loki and Grafana. So Loki is a data source. Loki is in another way, Loki is a database. Just like MySQL or Postgres or Prometheus or any other database that you've been working with. So Loki is where the logs live, where the logs are stored. And that is separate from Grafana. So you can use Loki without Grafana. You can use a different tool to visualize your logs. So there are, they work very well together, but you don't have to use Grafana together with Loki. Grafana is how you visualize, or how you look at those logs. And you can, as you saw in my last example, you can bring in those logs and compare it with logs from, for example, Elasticsearch or metrics from Prometheus. So Loki is a data source where data lives. Grafana is the tool that we use to visualize that data. I hope that answers your question. So what is tracing, and how is it different from observability, which is Grafana's core domain? So I briefly touched upon tracing in the beginning of this workshop. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into tracing in our exercises. But tracing, as we've seen so far, we've added Prometheus, which is a data source that contains metrics. Loki is a data source that provides logs. And just like Loki and Prometheus are example of metrics and logs data sources, we also have a third category of data that we typically want to display and visualize and work with in Grafana. And those are called traces. So traces is a specific type of data where you're, instead of looking at the logs, you can look at what happened, what's the life cycle of a single request. So when you look at logs, you get this massive wall of text for your entire system. But let's say that you had a request that failed, or received at 500, or it took too long. And you want to understand that request. What path did it take? What went wrong along the way? So if you have a microservice architecture where you have several services, working together and communicating, then it might be tricky to fully understand what's wrong. So with traces, you can instead look in a graph, when the request comes in, when it starts hitting the next service and the next service, and so on, and then how long each request took in that chain. So it's a different category of data, basically, compared to, for example, logs and metrics, which we've seen so far. And just like there are several projects within the log sphere, so for example, Loki and Elasticsearch both support logs, and you can bring in both of them to Grafana. InfluxDB and Prometheus are two time series databases that supports or provides metrics. You have Jaeger, for example, and Tempo, which are two projects that provides those traces. So in Grafana, you can bring in metrics, logs, and traces and visualize them together. So I hope that answers your question. How popular is Grafana in the enterprise? And is it a skill a novice needs to excel in DevOps at an earlier stage? So we definitely see Grafana in the enterprise. I should add that Grafana Labs, we do offer enterprise services. We do offer hosted Grafana. So if you don't want to run Grafana yourself, we can certainly help you do that. But if you want to deploy it yourself, run it yourself, and operate it yourself, you can definitely do that. We do have a lot of enterprise customers, but of course there are several enterprise companies that are using Grafana, the open source version, and not the hosted version. So I would definitely say that it's worth learning, even if you're in the enterprise world. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. I would definitely say it's a skill to excel in. And yes, the recorded session will be available. I believe it will be available on YouTube once the stream is over. So awesome. That's all I wanted to show you for today. Obviously, there is more to learn about Grafana. For example, I've only shown you 2 data sources today. Like I mentioned, there are several other data sources out there that you would have to learn separately from Prometheus and Loki. Prometheus and Loki are great data sources, but they're not the only ones. And if you want to know more, we do have a series of tutorials available on grafana.com/tutorials. And if you do run into any issues or problems, we do have a community forum where you can go and ask your questions. And yeah, that's all I wanted to share for today. And feel free to reach out to me at social media or GitHub at Marcus Olsen. That's usually where I hang out. So I'm not sure if you have any more questions for me. I'd love to stick around for a bit. That's awesome. Great to hear. Thank you. Yeah, that sounds good.